Hello, 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 everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. On behalf of Busboys and Poets, thank you so much for joining us for this discussion and the launch of Eating Behind Bars, Ending the Hidden Punishment of Food in Prison. We can clap and celebrate, yeah? That is what we're here for. If you don't know anything about us, Busboys and Poets is a community where racial and cultural connections are consciously uplifted and a space for art, culture, and politics to intentionally collide. I wanted to let you know that our Busboys and Poets servers are going to be helping us out throughout the entire program with putting in orders. I also want to remind you that there will be a Q&A after the discussion and a book signing after the program, and Eating Behind Bars is here available for purchase. And also, if you got the one book, one ticket option, if you can quietly sometime during the program, make your way to this table to come pay and pick up for your book. We're only going to be holding that till the end of the discussion, so make sure you get your book before we sell out tonight. And now I'll share a little bit about the book we'll be discussing here tonight. Prisons and jails are America's hidden food deserts, where hunger and malnourishment coexist with shocking levels of food waste because much of what is served is so awful it ends up in the trash. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner are tense and humiliating when incarcerated people are forced to eat in silence, finish meals within minutes, and disciplined with food deliberately worse than the standard fare. This disturbing portrait came to light in 2020 when the nonprofit Impact Justice released the first ever national examination of food in prison, catapulting the issue from the margins of prison litigation to the center of national conversations about mass incarceration and food justice. This landmark book digs deeper, revealing a systemic drive to cut costs at the expense of health and decency. It is also a story of resistance and hope, chronicling how incarcerated people and their allies are fighting back, as well as exploring farm-to-tray programs, chef-led initiatives, and other ways to make food in prison a source of healing and bring dignity back to the table. And now I'll pass it off to founder and president of Impact Justice and one of the book's co-authors, Alex Busansky.
Hi, I'm Alex Busansky, president and founder of Impact Justice. As you have heard, we're a national innovation and research center. Really excited to be here tonight. Really excited for this book. To say co-author is a gross overstatement. Leslie Sobel is really the author of this book. Has done an incredible job. Right, so it takes a village in many ways, but Leslie. It is, as an organization, as an innovation shop that thinks about criminal justice, that thinks about the world we live in and what we can do. One of the things we're really proud of is when we can bring a light to an issue that does not have attention. And we found about 4 or 5 years ago that food in prison did not have the attention that it deserved, right, for the number of people that it impacted and for the lives that were impacted by what was happening. So we're thrilled that we were able to do a report that then led to this book, that led to a series of projects that we've done, and that we work with some of the people here and many other people around the country. But I'm going to turn it over to Aisha too, who's going to be sort of facilitating this conversation, our Vice President of Innovations. She's amazing. My father once said, work with people more talented than you are, and you will be fine. And I've leaned hard into that advice, as you'll see with some of the people here on this panel. Aisha too, it is all yours. Thank you all for coming tonight.
You hear me? Thank you, Alex. Hi, my name is Aisha Yusuf. I am so excited to be in this room with you all today. I think walking in here and seeing so many of our colleagues that are here, the folks that support our work, folks that are in the industry around criminal justice reform and being here together really brought us to a place to think about we can actually create real change. So thank you all for being here. I'll introduce this amazing panel in just a second, but I think I want to ground us just a little bit into the conversation around the criminal justice space and the food kind of conversation around food. There's nearly 2 million people that are incarcerated in the United States today. And when you really let that sink in for just a minute, 2 million people are incarcerated in the United States today. Every single one of those people have to eat 3 meals a day. It's not happenstance that we are sitting in a restaurant, in a bookstore, but a restaurant, because food brings us to this space. It brings us together. And so often we think about the conversation around the justice space, so often the conversation on food is missed. And I can say that from my own personal experience. I have talked about the justice space and the atrocities inside of that. And never once prior to the work at Impact Justice did I have a conversation on the food. We've been to justice spaces, into carceral facilities, and never once have I sat down inside of a cafeteria and shared a meal with an incarcerated person. But I'm not alone in that. Alex was not alone in that. That was actually the conversation, generally speaking, that led us to this work. There was a conversation that I believe Alex was having, and one of the people got up to speak and they said, we don't want kids to have food as if they're in prison. And Alex walked up to this person, a really amazing woman, honestly, and said, well, have you ever had prison food? And the woman said no, naturally. And then Alex had the conversation about why should people in prison eat the food in which you're describing? So we wanted to know more about the space. So we did a quick search around what's happening inside of food spaces, and turned out there wasn't much. And so we had this idea to think about how could we bring a light to the conversation that no one else was having, which was around food in carceral spaces. So when Leslie came to the team, actually before me, but Leslie came to the team, the goal was actually just to write a couple one-pagers, a memo, just to see what was out there. And that idea turned into a series, a really long series. That's really great. You should read it. And it led us to the conversation on food in prison. And it led us to a series of understanding that this crisis was bigger than I think we even understood, and even that the people inside of prison understood that folks cared about. We connected the conversation on food in prison to the conversation on food justice in the United States. In that report, Leslie and our other colleagues spoke to the people in prison, their families on the outside, to understand not just how food in prison impacted people inside, but what that meant in our communities. We were super lucky in a conversation with the woman who leads the New Press, Patty. We gave her the report that Leslie and her colleagues wrote, and she put it on her kitchen table. And over Christmas, she told us that her daughter picked it up and read the report. And then she gave us a call, and at that time, she said, would you be interested in turning this into a book? There's not a whole lot of no's that we have, so that was definitely not going to be one of them. So we said yes, and that led to this conversation of taking our report and turning it into a book. And we're so lucky to have, one, people care about our work. We're so lucky to have people, both impacted and community members, that want to be a part of this work. And we were able to grow that report from an idea to a series to a book. And so really I want to thank Leslie and everyone that's here that participated in that process, because as an innovation organization, we only exist because of ideas. We only exist because people believe in our ideas, and then ultimately they fund our ideas and they can grow. So thank you all for being here, for reading our book and for telling folks about it, but also for reading the report, because that's actually what allowed us to get to this space. All right, so we're gonna get started because, well, Michaela didn't give me my 1 minute yet, but we're gonna go. A couple of things that are really important to think about before I let Leslie and the rest of the panel kind of dive in, is that although the first half of the book is really about the problem, which I think is important to ground ourselves in, I think maybe not most importantly, but importantly, the second half of the book is really about solutions around that book. What we found out from the report, and that is covered in the book, all right, is that food in prison is used as punishment. It is not there to heal people, to give people nutrition. It's used as punishment and to keep them alive in many ways. Oftentimes, the food that people eat in prison is labeled not fit for human consumption. Oftentimes, the food that people eat, they buy if they have the money to do it at a commissary, and that's not food that their body should have. And so what we understood both from the book, but also just from knowledge around what food we should eat, is that the prison isn't doing enough, and that they can and should be doing more. I understand also there are a lot of people that work in the criminal justice space that don't think about what happens inside of a prison. At Impact Justice, we understand the majority of people that are incarcerated, they all get out. And we want to make inroads to ensure that when they get out, they not only have the resources available for them to thrive, but that we think about how the prison could do better by them while they're inside. And that is partially what the work of this book does. All right, and that leads me to Leslie. So, I think prisons are purposely out of sight and out of mind. They're purposely in communities that lack industry and are far from our community, and that's purposeful. Actually, I was in a conversation earlier this week with a funder who said to me and Alex earlier, they said, before I got into the criminal justice space, I just kind of thought about people going to prison and one day they show back up. She said, I never thought about what happened on the in-between. That's clearly not the case for folks that are impacted by the system or their families, but I think that is actually common, right? People don't think about what happens when someone's there, what that process was like and how they get here. So I really have a question for you around why are we talking about this issue now? What is the urgency around it now? And yeah, I think that's my question.
Yeah, is this on?
I can hear you.
You can hear, can everyone hear me? Okay, it doesn't sound like it up here. Yeah, thanks, Aisha. That's a great question. I'm actually going to break that down into two pieces, the why are we talking about it and why are we talking about it now. Before I start talking about that, the why are we talking about it, I think you could go at that from many different perspectives. So for all the people who I gave a silver star to when you came in, if you could stand up right now, and also Laura Bain and Mika Weinstein, I didn't see you before you came in, but if you two could also stand up. So everyone who got a silver star, please stand up. These are all folks, the people standing right now, work directly, please stand up. All the people who are standing up right now all work directly around the issue of food in prison. So these are people who are researchers, they are dietitians, they are activists, they are community advocates. They are doing all kinds of really interesting work directly in this space. So can we just take a moment to applaud them, because these are my colleagues. Thank you all. So yeah, I mean, I think any one of those folks who just stood up, who work directly in the space, would answer that differently. But my answer about why are we talking about this really comes from my perspective. I'm an ethnographer and a folklorist. I study food and culture, really looking at this from the human perspective. How does food help shape our identity? How do we as human beings communicate with each other, not just around food at a table, but literally through food? How do we say, I love you, or I'm sorry, or, here, get better, get well soon, through food? It's a huge part of who we are and this general human experience, right? And if I asked any one of you in this room to tell me your life story in 10 food items or 10 food stories, I guarantee you could do it, right? It's something we all have in common. It's something we all have opinions about. I think this sense of food and identity and who we are and belonging around food is really starting to come to light alongside larger conversations. So this is going into the now question, right? Larger conversations around hunger and who has access to food, who has access to affordable food, to culturally relevant food, to nourishing food that is genuinely good for you. I think that, the answer should be everyone deserves good food. Everyone should have that access. And we've really uncovered the fact that people who are incarcerated generally don't. And a lot of times they're coming from communities where they haven't had that access beforehand, and they're returning to those communities where they don't have that access when they get out. And so I think part of what we're trying to do is really link up this idea of, like you're saying, this person really thinks of like prisons as this opaque box, like out of sight, out of mind, right? But that's not the case. There are people who are going in there who are still part of our communities, parts of our families, part of our food system. It's not separate. Food systems aren't separate. So why are we talking about it? Because food is central to who we are as humans. Why are we talking about it now? Because we're in this moment politically, environmentally, culturally, where we really need to start thinking about this and start thinking about how we're addressing not just people who are incarcerated, but also issues around food justice.
Thank you so much. I also didn't introduce that amazing human that just spoke. Leslie Silva is the senior program manager over at Impact Justice, who's on our food and prison team, also clearly the lead author of this book. So you all knew her, but I just had to officially say it. So yes, and also two other amazing people on the panel. Next to Leslie also is Daniel Rosen, who's the co-founder and director of the Advocacy and Partnership at the Coalition for Carceral Nutrition. Welcome. Thank you for being here with us today. And closest to me is Hyla Gantanquillo. I early learned out today that I have not been saying her last name, but she just got married recently, and I haven't been saying her last name. So I apologize. I said it correctly today? Okay, perfect. Hyla is a program manager on food and prison team as well, and is stood up with that star that Leslie gave up, because Hyla's work is really just helps us build out the food and prison work and the conversation on food. So let's give them all a round of applause to be here with us today. And Leslie, thank you so much for your response. I think I appreciate that you talked about what it meant to be in this moment. Particularly, I think there's so much around climate change and food waste that's happening right now. And I think so much of the work at Impact Justice is bringing people that work in those areas to understand that in the carceral space. And I think that's what Food in Prison does as well. It brings the conversation on climate and environment and food into the carceral space to understand that they're also part of that ecosystem. So thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. My next question is for both of you, if you don't mind. I'll start with you, then you can answer second. Does that work? Okay. You can talk about yourselves in whatever way you see fit. You both lived in the carceral space. You both lived in confinement, which means you live the idea of what it means to eat food in prison or eat food in confinement. Food in prison or in confinement period is not just sustenance, but it's used as control and as punishment. I'm curious, and I think others here are curious, what did that feel like when you were living it? How did it impact your health, your dignity in that space? And then the question I also have at the back of that is, how did you begin to regain that dignity on your exit? I'll start with you, Daniel.
That's a lot in one question. Thank you, and thank you for having me here. I appreciate
Can
this.
y'all hear Daniel?
Sorry, I'm a little hoarse. I haven't been at a conference all day, in fact, about food policy. And I appreciate the question. And there was a lot packed into that question. I think for roughly 6 years in local and state prison systems, I experienced what I can only really describe as carceral food systems of harm, is how I generally put it. We feed people in all the ways in carceral settings that we know are unhealthy, that we know are bad for them. We tend to have pretty good ideas these days about what is healthy and what isn't healthy, what is nutritious, what is rehabilitative, what is, going to help people when they come home. And I think we tend to feed people in the cheapest possible ways in carceral settings, jails, prisons. One of the hard things about this, I think, is generalizing too much. One of the things I did when I when I came home 4 years ago today, actually. So thank you. It's a good night for this. One of the things I did when I came home, I think, was understand how my experience was similar to others of incarceration and how it was different. It's very hard to generalize about 1,500 roughly state prisons, 3,500 roughly county jails. Add to that all of the youth detention facilities, tribal detention facilities, immigration detention facilities. All of these systems tend to feed people the way they want to. There's, in fact, somebody who was associated with like child nutrition and school lunch said to me, surely there are regulations around this. Surely there are. States do what they want. Counties do what they want. How that felt on the inside, I think, was your question, though, and I think how it felt was like daily neglect. As Leslie was kind of talking about, here in the world with our family, with our loved ones, we show people care and we show people love, often through food, and I think the opposite is also true. We show people indifference and we show people neglect, as I have said many times, 3 times a day. In jail or in prison, the state or the county tends to tell you how it feels about you. Yeah. When it hands you a tray of often unhealthy food, unappetizing food, inedible food, and I realize I am generalizing quite broadly. Someone will always bring up their personal experience where the food was pretty good. The director of the DC Department of Corrections did this recently in a hearing. I had lunch in my facility and I had a peanut butter sandwich and an apple and some chips and it was pretty good. I don't think the director of most facilities gets fed the same way as the general population, but that idea that a peanut butter sandwich was a decent lunch, I think doesn't acknowledge the experience of most people who have been incarcerated. And I think, I came to this when I came home. Leslie and a couple other folks were already working on this in the local DC context. And, generously, I think, made space for someone new at that table to dive into this issue. And people have said to me, is food really the most important thing that we could be talking about when it comes to jail and prisons? And my answer to them is usually, tell me you've never been incarcerated without telling me. We all out here care about what we eat every day, most of us. Labor, what we do for work, what we eat. I mean, these things are kind of fundamental to our sense of ourselves, to our sense of dignity and agency. And I think to kind of the last part you got at was coming back home and what that feels like to regain that agency over your health, your, just how you sustain yourself daily. I think it's very difficult for a lot of folks coming home to really regain that. I came home to a halfway house, and I was about the only one who used that kitchen. A lot of folks went to whatever fast food was closest. I was pretty ecstatic to have access to a grocery store and a kitchen to cook in myself. I think some of those lingering effects, they're still here 4 years later of having lost that agency for quite a long time and having lost that dignity around food and around eating the way we want. I did what I could for my health when I was incarcerated. I cared about it. I had a pretty serious medical scare before I was incarcerated, so I was actually, when I was incarcerated, I cared about what I was eating and my health. And it was a very difficult thing, I think, to protect that while I was inside.
Thank you all. Okay, thank you so much for answering for your response and for sharing that with us. I think one of the things that you said that I want to speak on a couple of things is having someone go into a prison and have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich one time is not a conversation about what happens every day. Also, I want to be clear that's probably bleached bread with sugary peanut butter. I want to be clear about what that was. But also, right, that person gets to leave and go make a different meal for themselves. And the people inside a prison probably have to have that peanut butter and jelly sandwich every day for as many years as they're in there, which changes the conversation entirely. You know, at Impact Justice, we're also a research organization, so we often say to people, right, if we're thinking about what happens most often to people. What is the thing that happens most often? And most often it's not a meal that people want to eat.
Yeah, and I can tell you at the DC jail that the peanut butters, that's the good lunch, because the other one is usually the green bologna, so.
Yeah, thank you for that. Hyla, do you want to respond?
Yeah, thanks, Aisha, too. So in terms of control and punishment inside of carceral facilities as it relates to food, I think that Leslie did a great job really describing what trays can look like for folks on the inside, right? Like there are institutional trays. Usually they look like slop, watered down, lots of carbohydrates, and really inedible, unrecognizable. My background is in nutrition and food, and so everything that I learned in the classroom prior to me having to fulfill my legal obligations, everything that was taught to me in the classroom versus what I saw on these trays and how we were being fed on the inside really was just in misalignment with public health messaging. And so for that, I interpreted that as that's punishment right there. Even as far as the feeding times or the chow times that they like to say, you know, referencing how they feed animals, again, a form of punishment. But feeding us at 4 a.m, banging on our doors and telling us that if we don't get up now for breakfast, we won't eat for the rest of the day or until dinner time, which is at 3 p.m., which is arguably maybe at lunchtime, right? Having that kind of control under the excuse of safety and security doesn't sit well for anyone on the inside who's relying on the state or a municipality to feed you under those conditions. In my experience of the carceral setting, I did go through the Fire Camp program, which is a contract partnership in the state of California where they contract incarcerated folks to work under CAL FIRE to provide wildland firefighting services on the line. And in that, I was actually pulled into the office and asked to become a rations clerk. And for those who don't know what a rations clerk is, the rations clerk is really responsible for maintaining inventory, for making sure that the menus, which is on a 6-week rotational cycle, is being complied with. And with that, I saw so many opportunities. I spoke with the supervising correctional officer and was asking, like, hey, what can we do? I'm tired of seeing chili mac. I'm tired of seeing, country gravy on biscuits. But mind you, like, I love country gravy on biscuits at home as a home meal. But in the institutional setting, again, it's all watered down and unrecognizable. And so my conversations with the CEO was, how can we restore the dignity of folks who are inside? How can we get people excited to go to work and feel like they're being of service to the community? And with that, I was able to create things like pancit. If you're familiar with Filipino food, like pancit and lumpia on the menu. I helped do that in partnership with the correctional officer. And so many women, I remember that night, they came up to me and said, Hyla, this is the best meal I've ever had. Just period. Like, not even while incarcerated. And you could just see the morale go up. And so for that, I saw that opportunities existed. And that leads me to answering the question about reentry. My advocacy for women and people who are incarcerated didn't stop when I left the gates. I would argue that it became even stronger because I saw opportunity and I carried out those opportunities on the inside. And so, when it comes to reentry, helping folks on the inside and the outside, what has really resonated with me are some of the things that we're doing with our Farm to Corrections work in great partnership with the Nutrition Policy Institute, where we have nutrition education workshops for people who are reentering so that they can gain a sense of what food security is, what does it mean to eat healthily, what is the importance of protein and carbohydrates, because I feel that on the inside, those types of things, that types of information is purposely, kept away from folks so that they continue to lose that sense of agency for themselves.
Thank you so much, Hyla. One of the things that I think you pointed out was around the idea that you got breakfast, what'd you say, at 3 a.m., 4 a.m.?
4 a.m.
4 a.m. and then dinner at 3 p.m.
Yep.
So it's really part of the conversation we're talking about is food, but it's also talking about people that are starving, right, and hunger. And Leslie talks about that in the book. And I think that is such an indication of that, because I don't know how many people go to bed at 3 o'clock, right? You have many more hours to be awake. So not only are you receiving food that's not healthy, you're also going to bed hungry, which leads to a whole nother set of mental and physical health challenges that people experience. And I think one of the pieces of that, right, is it's partially purposeful, what you talked about, right, which is persons are out of sight, out of mind. They're opaque on purpose. They are bureaucratic on purpose. You said something earlier, Daniel, that was said, somebody said to you that why is food important, right? In impact justice, we don't play like the punishment Olympics, right? Like there are so many issues that we have to talk about, and so often, so many of them, like food, you don't get to see. And so as a prison is opaque and bureaucratic and so much is out of sight and out of mind and unseen, that led us to some of our work. But that is purposeful, and I imagine that has a reason. So Leslie, can you explain more about how did we get here in that way, and why is it bureaucratic in that way? As much as you can.
There are so many moving pieces. I actually have a cheat sheet post-it note so I wouldn't forget to say anything.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, right, of how did we get here? Why is it this way? And I think if you ask people who are working in the corrections sector, why is it this way? The first thing they usually say is, well, it's the budget. There's not enough money. We don't have enough money to do things better. But I think, one, we have to question that, right, of the sense of like, we don't have enough money. Well, where does the money come from? It comes from attitudes. It comes from attitudes towards who is deserving of having things done better, right? And the answer, again, should be everyone. But I think in addition to the fact that that folks say, well, there's not enough money to do this right, there are so many bureaucratic moving gears, like it becomes a prison food machine. So just starting with, gear number one, menu planning. We have a couple of dietitians in the room who work on correctional food issues, including Dr. Laura Bain, who I see in the back. Laura, I'm about to quote your PhD thesis or dissertation, thank you. But Laura actually worked in 2 different departments of correction as the dietitian. And she did her PhD research on looking at menus for different kinds of dietitians, whether DOCs employed full-time dietitians to create really nutritional menus, or whether they employed part-time contract folks who would sort of like make a menu and run. And she found that there were significant differences. So number one is treating, nutritional guidelines and the actual nutrition in the menus as if it's something that's serious, right? Not all DOCs do that. There are no national standards. Like there are national school lunch standards. There are no national standards governing prison food and the nutrition and what's required to be served inside. Gear number 2, procurement. Aisha, too, I know this is your favorite topic. Procurement policies in prisons are so fascinating because they're different everywhere, and so many departments of corrections and individual prisons do not have any control over where they get their food or how much they're allowed to spend or where that food comes from. And even the folks inside who say, oh, I'd really like to serve more fresh fruits and vegetables. I'd really like to serve, this and that and these other things that are healthier. But they can't because they're locked into these state contracts, which are put together by people in an entirely different office, that are requiring them to buy from certain providers, or in some states there are correctional industries which are producing food, like in Washington state where all of the meals are pre-made and then served, and that's what's required to be served. In California, the Prison Industry Authority produces these cold bag lunches that then the kitchens are required to purchase, and that's where a big chunk of their money goes from. So, I think it's really interesting to look at this procurement issue as, another barrier to getting good food in. There are no real mechanisms for oversight and accountability. A lot of times, the same folks who are internal to a department are the ones doing the inspections. It's not like here at Busboys and Poets, the health department comes in, right? And if the food and the kitchen is not, healthy and safe, and they're not following the appropriate things in the kitchen to make sure that we're following safe food practices, then they can shut the place down. But that doesn't happen in prisons because you can't really shut down a place that has to serve people 3 times a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I think there are you mentioned up security issues before, and this idea of doing things in the name of security. We hear from a lot of people, well, we can't serve fresh fruit in a prison because people use it to make alcohol. And I think looking at that issue, right, yes, there will always be people who will take fresh fruit and make it into alcohol, but most people don't. And if you brought in fruit that was in, really good condition and that people actually wanted to eat, I know we've heard this from people so many times, then they'll eat that fruit and they won't use it to make alcohol. And the other thing that one of our colleagues, who is actually a food services director in a prison, says is you can make alcohol out of white bread, and white bread is everywhere in a prison. I think the other thing, you both mentioned the regulation of human behavior as a security issue, right? About people being able to have access to food that they actually choose and are able to handle it. We know that people can purchase things from a commissary or a canteen, but that's ramen, that's cookies, that's soda. It's not necessarily like whole healthy food. And even things like sharing food is considered a security issue. Bringing food, bringing a piece of fruit or a piece of cake back from your tray back into your living quarters, you can get sent to solitary confinement for things like that. So this idea that security has to trump natural behaviors around sharing food, around having access to interacting with food in a normal way. I think another thing to note is that, when it comes to the bureaucracy, again, I think food service and the medical department and procurement, those are all very different departments in most departments of corrections, and they don't always talk to each other. So you've got 3 different factors who could potentially influence the food that's being served and the way that people are being fed, and at the same time, they're not talking with each other. So if someone's on a medical diet, but those foods that are being recommended on the medical diet aren't actually available in the prison, we've heard from so many people who, I'm diabetic, but I just get told avoid all of the sugary stuff and the refined carbs on the tray, which is most of the tray, because we don't have a diabetic meal. Or, I'm sure Hyla and Daniel, you can give like 18 different other examples of folks who need certain kinds of diets, but they're not available. So all of these different bureaucratic pieces sort of come together into these gears that all interchange with each other and forms this machine that's really difficult for people to get out of. And I want to point out that this is not the fault of any particular individual in any particular Department of Corrections. We've talked to many people who are frustrated and want it to change, but don't know how. It's really a fault of multiple systems working together that are making it difficult, making it challenging for the folks who do want to make change to be able to make that change.
Thank you so much for that. That was a lot. And for clarity, procurement's not my favorite issue. That's why she said that. But I think one of the things that you said that I find really, a couple things you said, which is one, at Busboys and Poets, the health department comes in, is because they care about the people that are eating care, right? The prison doesn't care about the people that are in prison. And so why would they do all the things to ensure? Why would the system? Because I think it's really important that you pointed out that it's not an individual's fault, but a system of gears, what you call it, that is acting out what that is. And I think it's important. But I think deserving and care are some of the 2 big pieces that you said that I think really change the way that the system engages with each other, and purposely bureaucratic. We do work, a lot of folks here in the justice space or even a food space. There are so many rules and regulations that no one has any idea why they exist, right? And you have to figure out the rule or regulation or policy to even begin to break it down. And that is so hard to do. And we see it every day in our work, and actually why the project even became to exist in that way. One of the things that we all know, both I think in the work that we do, but also I'm imagining a lot of folks in here, is that people in prison are not just individuals inside of a prison. They have an impact on a community. They have families, both the ones we create in prison, but they also have families on the community, back when they come back to the community. They have individuals that they are in community with, that are in broad community that they're with, that they left behind when they left, that they are parents to, they are mothers, they are fathers, they are aunties, they are uncles, all of these things. And so a conversation on food in prison doesn't just impact them, but it impacts their community. There's a ripple down effect around what the carceral space does and how it impacts our community. So I'll go back to Daniel and Hyla for both of these questions, which is, you know firsthand what that ripple down effect is from what happens in a carceral space to then what happens in a community. Can you both speak to what that is? I'm gonna start with you, Hyla, this time, if you don't mind. What is that ripple down effect?
Yeah, I think when I think of individuals who are incarcerated, I also think of the family that stands behind them throughout their incarceration, right? For a lot of folks who are inside, for a majority, the makeup are, Black men, people of color. And so for those who are waiting for them at home, you have a lot of women who are carrying that load inside of multi-generational homes, right? Supporting children, supporting grandparents, other loved ones. And so when folks are having to support one on the inside, put money on their books, essentially that does take away money from their own families. So what we see is a lot of reliance on public benefits, reliance on food banks, other systems of support in the community. And so that does trickle out and create ripple effects onto neighborhoods as such. And also, when folks are coming home, less healthy than they were when they went in, we have our public health systems that are also being impacted and are also carrying that as well.
Thank you for saying that, Danielle. I'll kick it to you. One of the things that I thought was important, I think you and Leslie both mentioned this, is commissary, which is basically individuals that have money on their books. They can go buy things from a store inside of a prison. Oftentimes, the food that they buy is not necessarily healthy. They're usually things that can bring them some joy or some treats. But also, everyone doesn't have access to commissary. People only have access, as Hyla said, if someone puts the money on the book for them, which is not everybody. And so people not only don't have the access to do it, but they don't have the resources from their family to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's that's a great point. You know, recent studies say the average family spends about $4,000 a year supporting incarcerated loved ones. A lot of that's going to commissary, which means it's not disappearing into a commissary black hole. It's going to commissary companies that profit off of this business. Those commissary companies are usually, all of the main commissary companies are tied to all of the main food service companies. There's an inherent conflict of interest in those relationships. And I think it's when people do not get enough to eat. I think, you know, there's this kind of myth that people in prison get enough to eat. That people in prison get 3 hot meals a day, that they're food secure. People in prison are generally, in my experience, some of the most food insecure people I've ever met. And so when you're hopefully going to the chow hall again, hoping there's something on that tray that you want to eat, and you come back to your cell with maybe something you can use later, you're going to turn to your commissary and make a meal for yourself. And because chow was probably at 3 or 4 p.m. dinner, by it's 8 or 9 o'clock and you're hungry. And I think that level of food insecurity has lasting physical and emotional effects on people. I had to, laugh at myself. I've been home 4 years. My cupboard is still stocked with more coffee than I can probably use in 2 months, because there was times when the facility commissary ran out of coffee for months on end. And that kind of, it's kind of a silly example, but when you rely on those things, I think, and that rug is pulled out from under you, you're going to make sure even when you come home that you have that security, even in ways that, I can walk to 3 grocery stores within 5 minutes, but that lingers, right? And it's a small example, obviously. I think when folks come home and there are lasting physical effects, I came home with a mouthful of cavities and a couple wisdom teeth that had to be pulled. I came home with chronic diet-related disease that I didn't have when I went in. And by the way, rates of chronic diet-related disease inside are roughly 150% of what they are outside. Diabetes, heart disease, obesity, the list goes on. And folks are not getting the kinds of health and nutrition interventions that I think at least you can try to find out here in the real world. So folks are coming home, as you said, kind of putting a burden on the public health system. Having been, I felt like a burden on my family because, if the facility's not going to feed you anything that's edible, you're going to find a way to eat. And that includes, by the way, behaviors that facilities really don't want to promote. Food is contraband in prison. Good food is contraband in prison, I should say. Yeah. Food out of the officer's dining room. Fresh fruits and vegetables from the kitchen. These perverse kind of incentives that prisons and jails create for that kind of black market is a direct result of the substandard food service and the unhealthy food service. So yeah, when you can be, I took fruit back to my cell all the time. If there was fruit in the chow hall, I probably wasn't just smuggling mine back to my cell, I was probably smuggling some others that I had bought from other people. And that was, you're right, an offense that I could have been handed a ticket for, even sent to the SHU for in most places. When prison systems create, when food systems treat fresh fruits and vegetables as contraband, we've really created some very deeply dysfunctional food systems. I'll stop there.
I guess, can I jump in with one more
Yeah,
ripple
please.
out effect? Yeah. So beyond, I think, you alluded to this before, but the environmental impact as well. So even beyond like individuals and families and communities, the amount of food waste that is generated in prisons is over, as we've calculated from various numbers that we've seen, over 300,000 tons every year. That's immense amounts of waste, and it's food that's literally being thrown out because most of it is just too disgusting to eat. We've been to prison visits, on-site visits, and we have literally, Hyla and I have stood there and watched as people have taken their trays and literally turned them over in the trash. Take it from the window, turn it over in the trash, because it's just too gross. There have been times where we've been offered food and we've tasted things in prisons. There have been times where I sit there and I think, I hope they don't offer us anything because I really do not want to put that in my mouth. And that amount of waste is building up. It's creating methane and going into landfills in a lot of places. And there are so many ways that we could stop that waste. Food waste is one of the biggest polluters in the country, in the world. It's one of the biggest causes of climate change. And we could so easily stop that by simply preparing food that is edible and safe and that people want to eat. So
No, I really
yeah.
appreciate that.
It's even worse than that, right? I mean, we're feeding people diet-related disease.
Yeah.
We're literally feeding them disease, and we're creating trash. And in a lot of cases, where food service is privatized, we're handing these companies public taxpayer funds for it to get literally just thrown in the trash.
Yeah.
So,
That's
sorry
a
for
whole
that.
no, please. That's an entire conversation that we would love to have one day at Busboys and Poets. I think one of the things that you said that I really want to point out is you were saying that was a simple example using coffee. I actually really appreciate your example because I'm not a coffee drinker, but I imagine 95% of y'all are here. And I think it's really important that people start to understand like the simple things that we have in life, right, are taken for granted, right? Part of what is happening at your house right now is around scarcity. Right, and that is an entire mindset. There's a ton of research around what that is, and that is partially what prisons do around, and that's partially the purpose of it. So I really appreciate the examples. I think it's important for us all to understand literally the simple things that we have in life and what that means to a person in prison. So I really appreciate that. And Hyla, in the book we don't talk a lot about gender, but I really appreciate you talking about gender and sex in the book because the burden of what the prison system does on women, particularly, the majority of people that are incarcerated are men, right, if you go by numbers, right? But the impacts on families, particularly women that are left behind, is incredible. So I really appreciate you speaking about that. And again, would love to talk about that another day, really, because I think it's really important. But I'm going to stay with you for a second. We have two more questions, so I hope I can get to them. So the question I have for you, Hyla, is, and you spoke a little bit about this when you gave your example of Lupia, a little bit about this, but I'm going to switch it up a little bit and talk about the second half of the book, which is really around solutions and what we can do. So my question for you, Hyla, is you talked a bit about what it felt like to have agency around the food that you and people in the prison were eating. What does that mean, or what would it mean for people in prison to have agency around their food, to have agency or even a voice in how food is prepared and what the food they have is prepared, how it's sourced, where it's sourced from? Like, what would that mean? What did it mean to you?
It meant a conversation and not just telling me what I could and could not eat, but really having someone there to champion my thoughts and my thought process and also explore not just the why did I want that, but how could we make it happen? And I think that having that information, even just taking it back to the report, and doing that investigation and letting those who are closest to the problem, those who are currently incarcerated and formerly incarcerated, really speak to the issues that they've seen and they've experienced to inform future work. Because I think a lot of times too, there are so many great ideas out there and so many ideas that we want implemented. But what we've heard from folks on the inside is that, it's great that folks want to come in and do some pilot programs, but when we think about sustainability, what does that look like? Is it just another project to check off the list? And so really having folks at the table, letting them lead the discussions and letting them identify the problems and provide some suggestions for solutions, and we be that, the engine behind them to push them forward. I think that is really what agency can and should look like.
I appreciate that. And then the report that was created, That's what people said. We talk to people that are in prison. That's what they say around agency and voice. And I think that's how we all are as humans. Like, we want agency and voice in everything that we do. So I really appreciate you giving us that information. All right, I have one last question for everyone here at the panel. We have 10 minutes, guys, so you'll have like 2 minutes each. You can get it out. At Impact Justice, we lead with optimism. We believe, right, that although we work in a really antiquated system, the truth is that there can be something on the other side, both with the partnerships of folks in this room and other people, that the truth is we can build programs and conversations that can change the way people interact with the system. So we have to lead with optimism, because how else do we get up in the morning, honestly? And so just like in the book, we talk about that as well, about what can happen and what is possible. So the question I have for each of you, Leslie, I'll start with you, is if you could change one thing in the system right now in relation to food, what would it be, and what would be the first step? Go.
Can you come back to me?
Okay, Daniel, it's you. You're on.
That was sneaky. I think what I would start with is probably leadership and attitudes. I think there's a lot of things to change. There's a lot of potential answers. I think the book, and I had the privilege of reading an early copy, the book highlights a lot of the answers and solutions and pilots and good work going on all over the country. I actually am optimistic. I think this is not the hardest problem to solve. In a prison system, in a carceral system that has some really difficult, intractable problems around it. This is actually a pretty easy one to solve. It probably starts, though, with leadership and attitudes, and I think where we have leadership that understands the problem, kind of gets it. As you know, I hate to come back to Maine, but Maine is, I think, one of the states doing things right in this space, at least some things right. They have leadership that says, we understand there's a problem here. They have a why. They have a why for doing more than just the bare minimum. Checking the box, feeding people. We gave someone a tray. That's kind of the bare minimum, right? And so where we have leadership and we have attitudes that say, you know what, we have some pretty good reasons to do this different, to feed people differently, whether that's about the dollars they're spending on healthcare, whether that's about facility security and safety. Every major prison riot in this country, food has been an issue. And I think what we found is in those places where they are willing to try something different, they tend to have happier residents and happier staff. I think it's one of the things we don't think about a lot is correctional officers and civilian staff who often are eating some version of the same food as the people who live in those facilities. Staff retention is hard in corrections. So if that's part of the why for correctional leaders, I think that's great. I think there's good financial reasons to feed people better. I think there's good moral and human dignity reasons to feed people better. And I think there's, for correctional leaders and for state policymakers. Virginia, I think it was 2022, spent something like $25 million a year that year feeding people, and about $250 million, $250 million on healthcare. And those numbers are directly related, right? So I think that's the first thing we have to get at is that why. And the leaders who get it, those are the places that are, I think, highlighted in some of the chapters in the book that talk about solutions. And I think we need more of that. We need to give leadership of these facilities and these institutions the why to do something different. I think procurement is important, though. Once we have that buy-in, once there is that why and that interest and willingness to try new things, procurement is where the rubber meets the road. The DC jail here has contracted with Aramark for the last 5 years. They're about to renew that contract. And there are really good reasons to do things differently. And that procurement conversation is where that all starts. We have to put out better requirements that are not as limited when it comes to funding. Everything can't just be the lowest cost. and where there's been progress, it's been around local procurement. There's been stimulus to the local economy, to local farmers and producers by buying locally and feeding people a little better, fresher, more local foods in those places, even if the cost is a little higher.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So I'm gonna surmise it and say that the first step is to deal with leadership, and what they do is figure out the why. I'm here for it.
I think that's right. I always, when I find leaders who have done something different, my question to them is always why. Because they don't, in most cases, they don't really have to. They probably don't have a reason that somebody's telling them they must feed somebody differently, but there are good reasons to.
Yeah, I appreciate that. All right, Liz, I'm going back to you because Hyla, I'm gonna give you the mic drop at the end. All right, Leslie.
Yeah. So I think I've really been wrestling with this question because, I think when it comes to what's one thing that should change, right? It should be the actual food on the tray, and people's ability to have access to food that tastes good, is culturally relevant, is something that they actually want to be eating, that is nourishing to the body and to the soul. So when I think of that, I think about people who know food, people who are good cooks, people who are chefs, people who are good cooks at home, putting those people in charge of those kitchens and making sure that you're bringing that care, that lens into those kitchens to make food that tastes good. It is entirely possible to do. And there just aren't any places that are, really invested in doing that yet. So that's my sort of one thing, because as a system, it's hard to pull out one single thing. And how do we do that? What's the first step? I think is really just talking about it, like breaking the silence around this issue. There aren't enough people talking about it. I was just talking to one of my oldest and dearest friends who's here with us tonight. She was having a conversation with her family at dinner, and she was talking to her 7-year-old about, I'm going to Leslie's book thing tonight, and it's about, prison food. And she said her 7-year-old just got it and was like, yeah, it doesn't matter if people did something wrong, like they should still have good food. So if a 7-year-old can get it, right, and I know she's a very smart 7-year-old, but if a 7-year-old can get it, everyone should be able to get it, right? Everyone should know that everyone deserves good food. So just let's start that conversation.
Start with the tray. All right, Hyla.
I agree with what they said, of course. I also think that that'll take longer to make change, no offense. And so
Challenge your boss, Hyla.
no, but I really believe, in doing this work, if we can just change one thing, it would be unannounced visits. Health departments can come in, they can actually see what the grounds look like, they can see what the trays look like, what the kitchens look like. Jails and prisons are the only institutions that can tell the health department to wait because of safety and security. So I think until they can get a real expose as to what is happening on the inside and how people are being harmed by this, then we can really get the right forces behind all the movers and shakers that can actually move this stuff forward.
Mic drop, Hyla. Mic drop. Okay, we're going to switch to some questions. So before we do that, I just want to say thank you to you three for sharing so much of your knowledge with us tonight. Hyla's a policy person, so I'm not surprised by Hyla's response. Okay, so I'm going to kick it over to you.
Yep, we're going to open it up for questions. You can raise your hand. We're going to do as many people as we can in 15 minutes, so please be conscious when you're asking your question if you can. Anyone want to start us off? Don't be shy. No question's a bad question. Okay, right here. Thank you so much.
I apologize. It's more of a comment than a question, but I ran a social justice nonprofit. We were focused on shadow prisons, so people that were finished their time were supposed to be released and were incarcerated indefinitely. We went to prison in Virginia, a shadow prison in Virginia, and never got in, but we were getting information from people on the inside. So we, as an organization, with some volunteers that were related to the people inside, we started calling the health department ourselves. And the health department said what? With specific information, and they showed up, and they shut them down. And they said, well, what are we going to do? We have to feed, they said, you better call a caterer. So it is possible. And I think money, so you all were talking about changing attitudes. I think what Daniel said at one point was to stop the money, that this cannot be for profit. How to change that attitude, I don't know, like Aeromark. They're getting paid so much to feed per prisoner. I apologize for using that term, but per tray, per person. And how much of it is actually going for the food, and how big of it is profit? Who's looking at that?
Yeah, I think Folks are looking at that, though. Here in DC, I think what we know is Aramark gets paid about $7 million a year to feed people who are incarcerated in the DC jail. That's roughly $2.50 per meal per person. That's not ending up on trays. Most of that money, about 2/3 of it, as far as we can tell, probably is going to Aramark staff salaries. And about $250 a day may be being spent on food, as far as we can tell. Best as we can tell, according to what's in Aramark's contract and what's been reported. Yeah, per day, about $250 a day. And I think Leslie can talk better than I can to what facilities and systems are spending, but it's low. There's been a lot of conversation lately about SNAP challenges and what SNAP is, what people can afford on SNAP, which of course is being cut. But what people are eligible for under SNAP benefits is much, much higher than what is spent typically in most prisons and jails on feeding people per day.
Okay, one moment while I make my way back there. Excuse me.
Hi.
Hi, Mika.
So some of you heard that these are some of my former colleagues. I was privileged to get to work on the original report and research, but it's been a few years. I haven't been involved with the actual pilot work and implementation work, and I'm curious to hear, for this phase of the incredible work that y'all have been doing, what's the most challenging part of it? And I'm curious to hear about that from, whichever lens each of you wants to take that.
Hyla and Leslie.
Hyla, you want to start?
Yes, thank you for that question. Also, hi. So I'll talk about our reentry work. I talked about it a little bit earlier, our nutrition education workshops for folks in reentry. We've done our first run of it where our very small team conducted workshops across the entire state of California. We've created a second run of this, now bringing on peer facilitators so that those who have been there, done that, are now carrying this curriculum out to folks in their community. A challenge that we've experienced as our team is that these conversations around food and reentry aren't happening. And we have to build those conversations. It's like we almost have to build an argument for them to take this on and to talk about it. We're at competition with housing. We're at competition with, job security, job development. And it's like, well, this is a very fundamental issue that we have to talk about, because when folks hit the gate, their first idea is, what am I going to eat? Right? I haven't been home. What am I going to eat? So I think it might be in everyone's best interest to also continue that conversation when we're talking about wraparound services in reentry. Another challenge that comes with that, specifically to our work in this peer facilitation model, is the fact that folks are coming home with very different levels of skills, technical skills, facilitation skills, organizational skills, on top of very different levels of nutrition education. And so having to meet, not the facilitators themselves, but meeting with the CBOs and finding ways to gather more support for individuals who are experiencing reentry has been a bit of an interesting way to go about this work. And we're also finding ways to really shape our work around the folks who need it most. But it has just been an amazing opportunity to take a lot of those learnings and findings and share it out widely so that we can create more of that long-term programming that we're looking for. But thanks.
Yeah, that's a really great question, Mika. And again, I think I kind of have like a two-part answer, right? There's the logistical challenges of doing this work, this pilot work. As many of you might be able to guess, departments of correction are not necessarily the most innovative and accepting of change. So I think sometimes it's hard to have those conversations over and over again to try and get folks to understand why a change might be good, why a pilot project like Harvest of the Month, which we do in partnership with the University of California's Nutrition Policy Institute and the California Department of Corrections, and why something as simple as offering a lemon from a local farmer on the tray for folks to have and be able to do with it what they will is something that is so crazy innovative and this huge thing that requires months and months and years of preparation to be able to do. It's something that seems so tiny, and yet that's a very rewarding thing to have on the other side of the challenge when we go in for visits and, people are telling us, oh, I got a lemon. I haven't seen a lemon in 27 years. And people who are working on the DOC food service side are saying, I have been here for 30 years and I've never served people a lemon. And people are telling us, oh yeah, we had lemon chicken in the chow hall, and then, we got to, put lemon in our ramen so to give it flavor. Or, someone told us on that visit after the Harvest of the Month lemon that his cellmate had dried the lemon peel and then put it into very thin strips and used it to flavor his water over the course of several weeks. I mean, these things that we take for granted on the outside, right? Those challenges, it's, the logistical challenges of getting those tiny things done are immense. And then I think there's also, Mika, just, sharing with this room, the emotional challenge of doing this work, of doing this pilot work, trying to figure out where are we where are we doing more good than causing more harm and giving more power to some of these systems? Who are the partners and the players in this space that we can trust, that we know have similar values, that we can work with? What are we willing to give up or to do in exchange for being able to have access to some of these facilities, to be able to work with them and do this pilot work? I think, those are the kinds of challenges that to me sometimes are more difficult than some of the logistical challenges, but they're both equally present in doing this work.
That lemon made me think, though, if I ever got a hold of an onion, I would make that onion last 3 weeks easily. I mean, I would cut it in the smallest pieces and stretch it out so far. It was wild. That also made me think, I don't think I've ever asked you, what was the first thing you ate when you came home? I don't think we've had that conversation.
I can't remember right now, honestly.
What was the first thing you ate?
I don't remember.
I do remember that. And I was coming from way southern Virginia, so there wasn't a lot of options, kind of middle of nowhere Virginia, but the biggest Italian sub sandwich you've ever seen, something you just,
Comfort.
nothing even close on the inside, but yeah, big loaded up Italian sub.
Comfort, yeah.
I remember what I got. I stopped by, I don't know if you're familiar, Porto's in LA. If anyone's from Cali, there's a Cuban bakery called Porto's, and I am a big, big fan of their fruit tarts. And I remember I requested that. Yep.
Okay, right here, and then we'll come to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So my name's Kevin Kempf, and I'm the Executive Director of the Correctional Leaders Association.
good to see you.
Our members are every director of corrections in the United States, including some of the counties and jails like Tom Faust in D.C. or whatnot. I wasn't going to stand, but I just, my heart's thumping through my chest right now. I just wanted to mostly tell you two things. One is, in case you do wake up some mornings and wondering your efforts, if they're going unheard, I'm a representation that they're not. I live in Idaho. I'm in Washington, D.C. tonight to be here listening to this.
Thank you.
Not one thing. I grew up in corrections. I'm 30 years in the business. There's not one thing that was said tonight that's not true. Like, not one thing. Everything you said was impactful. We heard it. We hear it. And then lastly, I'm just going to end with a quick invitation, sir. So we've recently, just launched a project with RFK Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services, who wants to study what are incarcerated are eating. He's a firm believer that the food that we are serving those that are incarcerated are causing significant health issues. It's causing violence in our institutions, everything that we've talked about tonight. And that invitation is that if you're open to it, we would 100% have you have a seat at that table. With anything that we do with RFK Jr. and what we're about to launch, you will be at that table every single time because of the work that you're doing, your passion. And just lastly, you said it best, and thank you for saying it. Thank you so much for saying it. Change is 100% possible. It is possible. I promise you that, and so thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that.
Hi, I just want to start by thanking everyone, all the panelists up there, for sharing your stories and for writing this book. I will say very candidly, this was not an issue that I was aware of, and so I really appreciate the stories about coffee and the fruit tart. And they really bring home to those of us who aren't involved in the system the impact this has on our broader community. And I think it's really important for that awareness. Leslie, this question is primarily for you and then certainly for others. Talk to me about your challenges in writing this book, right? This is not an issue that I've known about. I think of myself as a known person. I would love to hear just a little bit more about that, please.
The challenges in writing the book?
Yeah.
Yeah, writing a book is not easy. I don't know if there's anyone in here who's done that before. I think like in terms of the challenges of writing the book, one, for everything that you read in the book, every story or anecdote or fact, there were like 10 more that didn't make it in. So trying to figure out what actually made it in. Our internal editor who worked very close with me, Jennifer Trone, shout out to you, Jennifer, was the first person to come through with the red pen and be like, okay, we don't need 12 pages on this procurement policy thing. No one wants to read about that. Or you don't, oh, Michaela, you want to read about that? Thank you. I find it interesting, but I kept getting told, no one wants to be this in the weeds. Or things like we would have, I would have like, 6 different examples of people eating, tacos that are made out of toilet paper and toothpaste because that's, what people do. And, it's okay. 1 or 2 of those examples is really enough to drive the point home. And it's like, but there are so many more to share. There are so many vivid examples, which is awful, right? But I think cutting those things out and figuring out what actually went into the book and what didn't. And then I think, the other big challenge for me was being asked to write this book on behalf of this organization. And, I am an individual with, views and ideas and things like that, and working for an organization that also has views and ideas and relationships with departments of correction so that we can do the amazing program work that we do. And so figuring out that balance of what to put where and how to say things and how to frame things in a way that felt real and true, but is also true to how the organization operates in the world. That, I think, that was sort of very, very difficult for me. There were a few things where I was like, this has to be in there. Like, this is kind of my non-negotiable. And then there were other things where it was kind of like, okay, we need to, figure out how to say this in a way that is, that is expressive of the organization because it is an organization's book. So I think those were sort of my 2 biggest challenges of doing that. And also, again, just like writing a book is a really hard thing to do.
And actually, can I just pick up on one thing, not about writing the book, because you did that. And I think what you said, though, I want to just highlight, nothing really happens inside corrections agencies without correctional administrators, and that's why I appreciate what you just said. Appreciate, Leslie sent me something a couple months back that said, did you see this? The secretary of RFK said something about prison lunch in the same breath as school lunch. People notice that. We talk a lot about school lunch. We talk a lot about what we feed kids. We all care about that. Everybody incarcerated is someone's kid. A lot of them literally are kids. So I think whatever else we might say when cabinet secretaries start using phrases like prison lunch, those are the kinds of things that can move the needle a little bit. And when correctional administrators start seeing the why and seeing kind of the harm that this is doing, I think we do stand some chance of taking these pilots and really scaling them, and the good work that IJ has been leading and doing in this field for years now, and making some progress on this.
I really appreciate that. I know we have to wrap up, right? I think I appreciate your question of asking Leslie what was the hardest thing about writing the book. I think one of the things I saw that happened with Leslie during this book is you had a desire to represent the stories well of the people that told them to you. And I think that it's not just like there's so many examples. I think that you wanted to make sure that you represented the people who told you their stories and are willing to tell their stories to you well. And I think that I saw that be a difficult piece of it's not just to take out an example, it's how do I represent the people that talk to me? And I really appreciate that. So we have to wrap up today. Please, there's a QR code on the table. Jenny or Vanna over there is demonstrating that right now. There's lots of books for you to purchase here today. I think the note that I'll end on is just like Impact Justice leads with optimism, so do all of us. And the truth is that the fact that book exists, the fact that Leslie had to go through the tragedy of writing the book and how hard it was, and Jennifer who came to help us do that, is a testament to things can change. 10 years ago, this conversation wasn't happening. 5 years ago, this conversation wasn't happening. And the fact that you all came to hear this conversation and to read this book tells me and tells all of us that change has happened and will continue to happen. So please lead with optimism. Please lead with hope, because clearly we are all the people that are going to do it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Just want to give a few instructions for signing as well. First of all, thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for such an amazing conversation. I'm trying to find the sweet spot where this won't go. Okay, perfect. Also, just want to make sure that you close out your tab before you leave tonight and tip your server if you think we did a good job. Perfect. Also, we have copies of Eating Behind Bars here at the table. So if you don't have your copy yet, you can start making your way over here. We're going to form a line. We're going to try to form the line this way. We're going to have the authors, anyone who's signing, to come sit on the stage right here or stand in this general vicinity to get the copies signed, and then you can make your way out the door this way. Also, bathrooms, there are some in this hallway, 2 in this hallway, and then on your way out, there's 2 in this hallway over here. And with that, thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your night.